A group of disgruntled viewers gave public television officials a petition today outlining their anger at station plans to air an edited version of D.H. Lawrence's novel Sons and Lovers. That decision has created a flurry of controversy, and it has raised anew questions about the role of public broadcasting. That's our story tonight on Idaho Reports.
The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.
Disgruntled viewers gave public television officials in Boise a piece of their minds today, and a petition signed by 900 people upset by the alleged censorship of a Masterpiece Theater series. Tonight, the flap over Sons and Lovers. Good evening. Controversy continues to surround a decision by Idaho Public Television to shelve an adaptation of D.H. Lawrence's novel Sons and Lovers, currently running nationally on Masterpiece Theater. Officials say they made that decision on the basis of two scenes, one showing bare female breasts, the other a depiction of sexual intercourse. Those scenes, they say, conflict with community standards and are not germane to Lawrence's novel. An edited version of this series, minus those two scenes, is scheduled to begin in July. Other stations in the region have handled the controversial scenes in a variety of ways. Some northern Idaho residents will be able to see the unedited version, currently running on KWSU in Pullman, Washington. Officials there say they saw no reason not to air it and don't expect any criticism. KSPS in Spokane is also running the series and will air the original version in its primetime slot, but will substitute edited versions of 2 episodes for the daytime showing. Seattle and Portland are both airing Sons and Lovers unedited, but are warning viewers of potentially objectionable material. Officials at KQED in Salt Lake say they aren't sure yet which version they will air when a controversial episode is scheduled for June 19th. In Provo, KBYU officials found both versions too risque and say they will run neither. And in Denver, viewers will see an edited version of at least one episode. In other markets, the decision to edit or not to edit has drawn little reaction. But in Idaho, where public television has long been controversial, it's kicked up quite a storm. Most of that storm has centered on Boise. Besides the 900 signatures on the petition, the station has gotten about 170 phone calls and 70 letters. Station officials say the calls have run about 3-2 in favor of their decision, the letters about 4-3 against it. Both supporters and protesters have zeroed in on Sons and Lovers, but the controversy has also raised anew some important questions about the role of public television, who controls it, and how programming decisions should be made. Tonight, we'll explore those questions. We begin with the man most responsible for the Sons and Lovers decision. Myron Tisdall is the program manager of the Idaho Educational Public Broadcasting System, the central management structure created last year by the Idaho legislature. Mr. Tisdall, just let me ask you first briefly, how was this decision made and by whom was it made?
Gene, we had an opportunity to preview the program in late March. And after I looked at the program and after viewing the show, felt that it was important that the 3 managers of the 3 public stations in Idaho, along with the general manager and the rest of the central management staff of IEPBS, look at the program, because at that point it was my suggestion that the program contained material that was controversial in nature and that would be difficult to defend because it was not a part of the original work. The decision was unanimous to agree with that decision, and at that point we then asked for an edited version of the program because we are not allowed by law to edit material.
How does a station, how do you go about gauging what community standards are in the case of material like this?
It's a judgment call, there's no question about that, but I think it's based not on an individual's opinion, but rather on the opinion of many people. We have, by law, procedures that we must follow to do that through what is called ascertainment. During the past year, we have made over 2,000 interviews of residents of this state, ascertaining their needs, their philosophies, their opinions. That, along with the letters and the calls that we get, the unofficial talking with various people, communicating, becoming a part of your community to determine what constitutes your community. Also by looking at the the demographics of the community that are available. Is how we reach then that determination. There are many audiences that we serve.
In your definition, is this censorship, although perhaps justified censorship?
I don't believe this is censorship at all. I think, in our opinion, it is the fact that the original presentation of the material, as it was presented in this country, first of all, I think the audience needs to know that it was edited from what was seen in England to begin with. It was edited by the producing station for an offer in the United States. But the material that we have successfully asked the producing station, WGBH, to delete is in reference to a 4-line statement in the book that was expanded. And in our opinion, it is not along the original material that was presented. It's superfluous to the adaptation.
After the reaction that you've seen, would you make the same decision again?
Yes, we'd make the same decision again. The audience, when you talk about a television audience, it's difficult to put it into one group because there are many diverse individual groups of people, specialized interest groups that watch public television. And we're not serving, while KAID is in Boise, Idaho, and KISU is in Pocatello, and KUID is in Moscow, those aren't the 3 communities that are served. And the opinion that of what is presentable in one of those communities may not be acceptable in a St. Mary's, or may not be acceptable in a Rexburg, or may not be acceptable in Weiser, just as examples. It is the whole state, and that is our audience, and they're diverse groups, and they have varying opinions on both sides.
If I can summarize then and see if I'm summarizing correctly, the material wasn't, you felt, necessary to the presentation of the novel. You have a legal responsibility. The community standards, as you understand them, were in conflict with it. Is that pretty much?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. The group responsible for today's petition includes a number of faculty and staff members at Boise State University. It says the Sons and Lovers decision does constitute censorship. Adrian Taylor is a spokesperson for the Disappointed Friends of Four. He is the head reference librarian at Boise State University. How does this constitute censorship, Mr. Taylor?
I think censorship is a negative decision, and selection is a positive decision. So to single out one series from the Masterpiece Theater to shelve would, I believe, constitute censorship. To add then the series back at a later date in an edited version still constitutes censorship, I believe. It is a reaction to the negative. It violates the artistic merit of, or at least calls into question the artistic merit of the people who produced the film, no matter how faithfully or unfaithfully they were following the novel. The novel, as you no doubt know, contains relatively little dialogue. Much of it is done in a passive voice, and it is left to the imagination of the reader or the filmmaker to fill in the blanks, as it were.
Does your definition of censorship then mean that any decision not to select a particular program or a particular series or whatever would constitute a form of censorship?
If the decision not to run a program is based on an assumption of morals of the community or political feelings of the community, that would be censorship. Obviously, of the variety of materials available and within the constraints of the budget, selection must take place.
Is there any sense in which public broadcasting, or any other medium, but public broadcasting in this case, should consider community standards, whether they're sexual mores or other kinds, and censor in your definition?
There, of course, is an ideal and a practical to everything. Ideally, no. Individual selection in whether they choose to view scenes shown or programs shown should, I believe, take care of that. Obviously, something which violates the standards of the community, a large segment of the community over a long period, would mean the television would lose, the station would lose its audience altogether.
Finally, the petition, you haven't made this reference, but the petition that was circulated did make a reference to not wanting anyone to determine what the people who signed that petition would watch. Is that even a possible situation, or how would that work?
Again, in the negative. If the decisions are made from a negative point of view, judgment of other people's judgment, it seems to me that does constitute censorship and should be avoided if at all possible.
Just briefly, do you disagree with Mr. Tisdale's reading of community standards, or do you simply think that they shouldn't have played that kind of a role in that decision?
I think some of both.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. Although the Idaho legislature does not provide funds for nighttime programming on public television, it was instrumental in creating the centralized management system, and many of its members individually have been outspoken about program decisions. Lyndon Bateman is a Republican representative from Idaho Falls and is currently the caucus chairman in the Idaho House. He is generally considered a conservative and has in the past been highly and very vocally critical of public television's failure to censor material he found objectionable. Mr. Bateman joins us in the studios of public television station KISU in Pocatello. Representative Bateman, how about the decision in this case? A correct one in your opinion?
I believe it was correct, Gene. One reason PBS has been such an attractive alternative to the commercial is because the commercial TV has become that vast wasteland, as it's been referred to, where we've been able to expect nothing grander than, say, Gilligan's Island. That's the ultimate, or has been the ultimate. Sex and violence continually. And so PBS has been an alternative. And I think when we start bringing in scenes of nudity and sexual intercourse, this kind of approach to programming, then we're actually losing some of the attractiveness of the public broadcasting system. I don't think you can expect a free intellectual atmosphere in a public system like this that you would in a closed system if it were cable, paid for by the individual who signed up for it.
Because it comes into people's homes?
Yeah, it comes into everyone's home. My little daughter, 13, 14-year-old girls will tend children and they'll be up late at night. And these programs, turn on the program and there's a nude scene. It comes into everyone's home. I think it's implies a certain amount of arrogance.
Advocates on the other side might say that it's up to the parents to control the children.
Well, if it's that, it isn't that easy. Like I say, it's kind of hard to keep track of just what is coming in through the system. My 14-year-old girl tending children at someone's home, it's just really hard to keep track. She could turn on the station right in the middle of a program, and I just think that where it comes into everyone's home, that you shouldn't expect the same kind of free intellectual atmosphere that you would through some other medium.
Is that censorship?
Well, I think you'd have to perhaps call it that. Editing of programs. I don't think even Mr. Taylor would possibly agree that anything could be played on PBS. You could, I suppose, you could take a novel by D.H. Lawrence and make it into an X-rated program. And I'm sure that even those who sign these petitions would not agree that anything should be that it should be wide open.
Everyone has a line. It's just a question of where they draw it. You talked at one time when you were disturbed about some programming decisions a couple of years ago about a possible need to set up some sort of formalized mechanism to monitor the treatment of profane and sexual material on public television. Is that something that's no longer needed?
Well, I think the way you've handled this was very appropriate. You have the program director, Mr. Tisdale. You have a board, and I think that as the programs become available, they should be carefully reviewed. And where scenes of nudity, and sexual intercourse, profane language, those things should be edited out properly.
If that does not happen properly, in your opinion, is it then the role of the legislature to use the funding stick?
Well, I don't think that the legislature should generally be involved, and certainly there should be controversial materials. It loses its substance if you try to eliminate all controversy through the system. But nevertheless, we respond to constituents. And where $583,000 of tax money has gone into the system, we respond. And if our constituents complain, we will indeed make inquiries. And I would hope that would only be done under, extreme situations. But I think it's part of the education system of this state. We are a board of directors, as it were, the Idaho legislature. We're responsible for funds that we appropriate and where those monies are being spent.
So in an
what
extreme,
they perpetuate.
in an extreme situation.
In an extreme situation, I think it would be appropriate.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. Although most of the criticism of the Sons and Lovers decision has come in Boise, a few Northerners have been upset as well, generally by what they see as the heavy hand of Boise-based management. Tom Boyd is a Republican representative from Genesee. He serves on the budget-setting House Appropriations Committee and has often been labeled a moderate. He is with us tonight in the studios of public television station KUID in Moscow. Representative Boyd, is this censorship? Is it necessary?
Well, it's censorship. There's any question about that, Gene. But then I don't differentiate too much between censorship and editing. And whether you're talking about the printed media or the visual media, everybody has to make a judgment call. An editor does for a newspaper. Mr. Tisdale has made a judgment call for this particular program, Sons and Lovers. I think that the reaction, for example, that we've had in northern Idaho here has not been too vocal. Right in the area here of Moscow, it has been more so than any place else. I think I approach this from quite a pragmatic point of view as opposed to maybe the idealistic point of view, and that is going back, Gene, a little bit to what you just discussed with Representative Bateman. Yes, indeed, the Idaho legislature would, could, and probably should get, well, let me retract that, maybe shouldn't, but will get involved if these things are not taken care of in the manner that Mr. Tisdale, as I perceive it now, is trying to do. The vast difference of our audiences just dictates that this has to happen. I've always subscribed to the theory that if you don't like the cotton picking program, turn it off. But you do have this problem of children coming in and being able to flip the switches, and if you flag a program at the beginning of it, you immediately send up a warning that something good or bad is about to happen in this program, and I don't know that that really justifies putting these kinds of scenes before the general public. So pragmatically, I think these editorial type decisions have to be made.
If I'm reading you correctly, then you might not personally have been as disturbed as, say, Mr. Bateman might have been had the decision gone the other way, but you could see possible repercussions.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I probably would have been. I'm not so sure that, Lyndon's a big boy too. His concern, I think, is maybe the younger people of our viewing communities. Nobody particularly that I know of likes to see these kinds of scenes unless you want to go to a X-rated movie or something, and it's your opinion and your prerogative to do this. Personally, I'll probably watch the KWSU version.
What about this other issue? The Idahonian newspaper called the decision dictated essentially from Boise. Your colleague, Senator Norma Dobler, said that was an unfortunate part of the central management system, and yet the manager of KUID yesterday indicated that he had been involved in that decision and concurred with it. How do you read that situation?
Well, I don't read it that way at all, Gene. I mean, number one, when the total program public broadcasting system was reorganized in Idaho under an individual central management in Boise, I mean, after all, these decisions have to emanate from there. And if Bill Campbell here from here in Moscow was involved in that, as he was, then he has to share some of the blame. You might remember back in 2 years ago when we were having the intense discussions in the legislature about this, the B was put on the backs of the presidents of the universities. Now, Mr. Cantwell is responsible to Dr. Gibb, and he will make the decisions that he feels are appropriate to the viewing audiences within KUID's area. And I think Mr. Tisdale probably is perfectly within his rights, and I don't feel at all that Boise, in this case, is dictating to Moscow or North Idaho or to southeastern Idaho. I just don't feel that. I think it's this whole system, in my opinion, is much improved over what it was, and I'm satisfied that that we're not being led down the primrose path by a certain section of the state in this area.
Well, thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. Let me open this up and go back to Mr. Tisdale and ask him about this question of different standards in different parts of the state. How much, under the existing structure, how much autonomy can the individual stations have in an issue like this?
Gene, at the present time, the stations have autonomy to broadcast materials for their individual service areas. Currently, for instance, KUID, Channel 10 in Moscow, Channel 12, is broadcasting PBS Late Night. The other stations are not airing that, serving that community. We changed the times of some programs for the individual community. Well, the point I'd like to make, I think that everyone's touched on, and I would agree with Mr. Taylor that, one, if this was an ideal situation, there wouldn't be anyone to make it a determination. Or I would also agree that D.H. Lawrence left much up to the imagination of the reader. And I think why I'm saying this is not a censorship issue, but an editing issue, is if the program were eliminated because of nudity that was included in the program, that would be censorship. Why we have shelved the program to present it at a later time is because of an editing problem of presenting material that was not included in the original work, rather than eliminating material that was in the original work. There will, when we present this program, going to be viewers in our audience that possibly will complain because there will be some scenes of nudity in the program, there will be some adult material in the program, but it's as presented by D.H. Lawrence, not as presented by an editor.
Mr. Taylor, do you buy that distinction?
No. The artistic merit of this episode, this series, is as much a product of the people who made the film as D.H. Lawrence himself. Obviously, no filmed version of any work of either fiction or nonfiction can be absolutely true to the original.
Let me go back.
I
yes.
find the most interesting thing I find about this whole controversy is the fact that much of that's coming from people that have not seen the program. They have not seen the original material, and I realize that, and they're saying they are the ones that should be able to make that decision. But by law, by federal law, as broadcasters, we cannot just open up and present anything. It is the responsibility of the licensee of the station, according to the United States Supreme Court, to determine what is seen and what is presented in that community. Not done by the network, not done by someone in New York, not done by someone in Los Angeles, but done by that local community station. And we're the ones who have to make the determination. I don't know who else would do it.
Let me go back to a point raised by Representative Bateman a moment ago. He indicated that he sees, at least in part, public television as an alternative to the violence, the sexual content on commercial television. On the other hand, the protesters, a number of the protesters against the decision that was made, saw the role of public television as an alternative to what they considered pablum intended for children on commercial television, and said that rather than that, what public television needed to do was program for adults, to be an adult alternative to commercial television. Is there any merit in that, Representative Bateman?
Well, certainly I'll agree that commercial stations has become pablum, and it's directed to about the mentality of a 13-year-old, 95% of the programming. But by the way, am I to understand that this edited version would have nudity also?
Let's ask Mr. Tisdale about that.
Yes.
Oh, that's most unfortunate, I believe. I think that if you start showing nude scenes on public TV, you're going to hurt yourself in the long run. Even the commercial stations haven't gone that far. I don't recall ever seeing a nude scene on the commercial. There's sex and there's violence, but I don't recall ever seeing a nude scene. And if you're going to play that, go run through that scenario, then I think you're going to hurt your image, not only the image of PBS, but of the universities involved. And goodness knows the image isn't always that strong.
Does that concern
And
you?
I'm upset even if you have any nudity at all in it, and I'll fight it right down to the wire.
Where do you draw that line, Mr. Tisdale?
I think there are as many as there are definitions of what is editing, what is censorship, and what is also nudity. I think that when material, when it's justified as far as representing the original work, that again we have a great number of audiences and people express their opinion constantly, and we weigh all those opinions in making our decisions as one group of making the decisions of what is presented. And whether the material is controversial, and whether that is controversial because it's politically controversial, or whether it's controversial because of the subject matter of the material, if it can be justified to present it to the majority of the community that we serve, then we most likely would have an obligation to present that.
We only have a couple of minutes left. Let me ask the other legislator, Representative Boyd, whether the prospect of some nudity of some form in that program bothers you.
Only to the point, Gene, that as Mr. Bateman said, it will cause a problem from a funding point of view. This is not necessarily correct, but trust me, it will. And I think Mr. Tisdale is right. It would have been a lot easier to have commented on this program tonight if we had seen, the edited and or unedited version of this. But I was of the opinion that probably all areas of concern were edited out of this. I don't, I haven't seen it, so I can't really comment.
Is this really a kind of a paradox you've got here, Mr. Tisdale? You've satisfied some people by making the decision that you made. Those same people may not be satisfied with the lengths to which you've gone. Is there a chance you'll end up pleasing nobody?
Very likely, or we will please some people in both ways, in both systems. But that's the programming process, that to serve as many people as we can with a wide variety of programs. We don't serve everyone with one single show.
Just briefly, Mr. Taylor, how do you react to Representative Boyd's indication that regardless of his personal feelings about how a decision like that is made, it will impact funding?
If that is the case, I think it would be very unfortunate. I would hope that it would not be the case. After all, nudity is not something new to PBS. It's been on this channel and all other channels for a number of years. And I would hope that the legislature would provide funding for educational television to present alternative programs for both adults and children.
Thank you. We are out of time. I'd like to thank our guests, Representative Tom Boyd in Moscow, Representative Lyndon Bateman in Pocatello, Myron Tisdale, and Adrian Taylor in Boise. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gene.
That's all the time we have for tonight. I'm Jean McNeil. Good night.
The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.